But Roger Hallam researched the dynamics of mass mobilisation at King's College for 5 years and has been at the forefront of campaigning for many years, including co-founding the Extinction Rebellion. He was ranked as the 34th most influential person shaping progressive politics in Britain by the New Statesman in 2023. Roger's acts of civil resistance have led to over 30 arrests and 4 periods of imprisonment. So over to you, Roger. I think you have about 15 minutes to speak, and then I will introduce Chris. So off you go, Roger.
Great. Well, hello everyone. Unfortunately, I wasn't going to be doing this session, but someone was ill, so I've been parachuted in. But hopefully everything will work all right. So I think I'm going to talk about the general principles of bottom-up mobilization, revolution, and all the rest of it. And I'm sort of assuming, Chris, you're going to correct me on things I've got wrong and then talk more specifically about the Brixton sort of assemble situation. So hopefully that's going to be all right. We work together quite a lot, me and Chris, so we're always improvising. So in some ways, I'm going to say a few things that are fairly similar to what I've just said in the introduction, but obviously I'll go into a little bit more detail. As Harley said, I've been involved in sort of organising people for many decades, as they say, and um, and that's involved community organising and also doing big national campaigns. And as I said in the introduction, there is a general feeling, I think this would be correct to say, that around the world people are increasingly focusing upon how we can mobilize local populations to create mass movements, to create a sort of popular left um, big move, as you might say, which is the main response to the rise of the far right around the world. So that's like the big picture. Um, I think obviously the title of the session, Building Revolution from the Bottom Up, I think it's called, from the ground up. I think it's worth, again, just reminding ourselves that revolutionary periods are going to come down the road anyway, one way or another. So it's more a matter of what type of structural disruption they're going to be, whether they lead to fascistic outcomes or whether they lead to radical, democratic, socially just outcomes. And obviously, the jury's out on where that's going to lead. But what is obviously the main issue is how we can um, influence these developments over the next 5 to 10 years. Um, okay, what I'm going to do is go through a fairly specific like run of stages on how mobilization can work using this broad model. And obviously, I want to make clear before I start that there are very much variations on the theme and there's lots of experimentation that's happening, and we're very much standing on the shoulders of giants, as always, in terms of the mobilizations that have been done, particularly in the global south with mass movements, particularly over the last 150 years in the various syndicalist traditions, for instance. So there's nothing particularly original about what I'm going to be saying in terms of the general idea. But what I think the big challenge is at the present time is to reconnect with those traditions and with those other communities of resistance around the world so that we can get with the program, as it were, and understand how to do things effectively and work together to share a lot of the sort of micro bits and pieces that Chris is going to talk about. So please don't think that this is, the only way or anything like that. But what I'm going to say now looks like broadly the main scenario. Let's put it like that. So I'm going to go through for 5 or 6 stages, depending upon how you organise them on what how you move from a ground up mobilisation into a big political mobilisation into a system change scenario. It's going to be broad brush stuff, and as I said, crises will be talking about more of the details in various contexts. All right. So the biggest thing to understand about mobilization is the first part of the state of the process involves listening rather than talking and telling, because most populations most of the time are in a state of apathy, in a state of repressed agitation. They don't want to be told what the situation is, not least because they already know. The way to engage with people is basically to listen. And concretely, this means knocking on doors and doing a survey and going, what's the state of your housing? How do you feel about food prices? What's the state of security in your area? How do you feel about the cost of living? These sort of questions, where most people, who of course aren't part of the middle class, most people that are broadly working class, have a lot to say about these. So you do what's called a listening exercise. So, for instance, this has been done recently in lots of different places. In particular, the Left Party in Germany did it before the elections in Germany a year or so ago in Berlin, knocking on doors, asking about the housing situation in Berlin and what have you. It's also been done with the mayoral election in New York, which obviously everyone will be aware of. The inside story of that is tens of thousands of people knocking on doors, again, not telling people, what they should be thinking and what they should be supporting, but engaging in a dialogue with them about the state of affairs in their neighborhood, in the city, in the world, and what have you. And it's through that you create the connection that allows you to authentically ask them to do something at the end of the conversation, right? You can't just knock on a door and say, do this. It doesn't really work. And this applies obviously to other contexts, listening to people in workplaces, listening to people on the street, was lots of different contexts, in churches, in mosques, in social clubs, anywhere where people are gathering, or you can get hold of people, you can do these open questionnaires. So through that process, you get to understand how a local population sees the world. So this varies from, place to place. Obviously, in some places there's a massive pollution crisis. In other places there's a big business development. In other places it's a food desert or whatever. In the place where me and Chris have been doing this, it's about homelessness, mental health, addiction. So after a few weeks of doing this listening exercise, doing 30, 50 hours a week for the sake of argument, you will get a good idea of where the community is at. But you can't skip this stage because you never know. And also, it's disrespectful to go into a community and suddenly tell them what the big issue is without doing this listening exercise. So the second stage, stage two, as you might say, is to run a campaign. So, as I said, these stages are very general. You might immediately be doing a campaign because there's already a campaign, as you might say. Or it might take a long time to do a listening exercise for various reasons. But let's say, for the sake of argument, you're doing it for 5 or 6 weeks and you've already identified what the big issue is. Then you do a community campaign. So this involves having a big public meeting. In most cities, the best way to communicate this is through a mass postering, putting, hundreds of posters around the city centre, the town centre, the centre of the borough, saying, hey, this is the big issue, come to this community centre and talk about it. And as Chris will go on about, we did this in the borough of London, and we had 150 people turned up. We had to turn people away. The reason why that meant that many people turned up was for two reasons. Number one, we objectively knew this was the biggest issue because we'd done our homework. And secondly, because we'd done this mass postering. Obviously, in different contexts, there's other ways of doing it. You can promote it through doing a petition. knocking on doors, social media. So it's not either or. You want to do all these things. But there's something very dramatic about plastering, 500 posters around half a metre of public road where, 50,000 people are going to walk along that road in the street and they actually see it, they go talking about it, and you start creating some momentum. So once you've created this campaign, there's a bunch of things that need to happen. You need to create, what we've done in the UK is create WhatsApp groups. Again, this might change it. There might be other social media in different countries. And people will engage in those WhatsApp groups or the online groups, whatever platform you're using. But it's a platform that everyone uses, right? This is has to be easy access. It can't be some weird, have to go through various passwords to get into it, right? It's got to be easy, a one-click affair. And then you can create different groups, youth groups, groups to reach out to churches, mosques, Buddhist centers, groups to go and talk to people that are suffering, like the homeless, or people that are suffering from food poverty. And then an organising group that's going to lobby the council or lobby the local government, whatever the target is of the campaign. But as you'll notice, the key thing here, these are the bread and butter issues. This is where people are at. You're not knocking on doors going, hey, we need a revolution, right? Everyone's going to tell you to fuck off. It's just like, guys, that's not the way to do it. And that leads then to putting independent candidates up in the elections because you've mobilized the community and you've got connections. We can talk about more about this in the Q&A. And again, in the UK context, there's a big booming sort of left party called the Your Party. It's not as booming as much as it was, but it's still there. And the Green Party. And there's lots of independent candidates. So the whole idea is to build this big coalition of a left populist coalition, which basically enables the community to participate in creating candidates and creating their own programs. And this then leads to, getting seats on the council, on city councils, but also creating parallel institutions. And this is where we come into classical, syndicalist revolutionary theory, which is dual power. This is the main meta move, where you create an assembly which parallels the council, parallels the city government, and ultimately parallels central government. And that parallel assembly is selected by sortition randomly from the population, and it comes up with what the budget should be, what the policies should be, what the big demands of most people most of the time are. This then leads to, the moments of crisis which are coming along, whether it's climate or economic, and there's an end game scenario where you have what's called a pincer movement, where you have people on the inside of the system, people that have been voted into the assemblies, into the parliaments, and you have a street movement. And those two movements, those two elements of the system come together in order to get structural change. And that the main aim here is to have sortition-based national government. In other words, like the people rule because the people have been selected randomly. So that's, I'm not going to talk masses about that because, what most people want to know, presumably, is the first three stages rather than, the final bits and pieces. But the last thing I want to say, if Harley's going to give me another 30 seconds, is there's a general idea that this is a hard slog and, you have to build up for years. And you're absolutely right. It is a hard slog and it is about building up for years. And at the same time, you have to understand that this process also is very fast, particularly when there's a crisis. And people forget that most revolutionary episodes happen, in 3 or 4 months. Not much is happening. There's a big rupture, there's a big crisis. And if you have the infrastructure, this is the big strategy, right? It's not about winning in a linear way. It's about building up the knowledge base, the confidence base, the organizational base, so that when the ruptures happen, you're in your neighborhood, you're in your area of the country, and you call a big online assembly, a big offline assembly, and you already have people who know how to mobilize people for the big demonstrations and obviously to work with people that you voted into power. So that's the general gist in 13 and a half minutes or whatever. Harley's given me to speak.
Brilliant.
Is that all right, Harley? Was I?
That,
Did I?
that was fantastic. Just
Oh,
slightly over time.
sorry about
So
that.
you will be
I'm a bit of
getting
a
a letter in
rebel,
the
you see.
post
I
afterwards.
always like to go over 1 minute, really.
Okay, brilliant. I'm gonna thank you very much for that, Roger. Round of applause, everyone. I don't know if we can hear that, but if you do a round of
I
applause,
feel like I'm in a cell.
yeah, yeah, because we can't actually see anyone. Okay, if you have questions, please pop them in the Q&A, and I will come to them at the end. Thank you very much. Brilliant. So I'm going to pass over to Chris. Chris Chudley is a graduate of politics and international relations with a passion for climate and animal activism and critical theory. He has experience in founding and coordinating community action and democratic revolutionary groups, showing his passion for positive change and the hard work he puts in to achieve it. He's working towards building a better system of democracy by building exciting new models and implementing them from the grassroots to the national level, a change much needed if we are to address the polycrisis we find ourselves in. I'm going to pass it over to you, Chris. You have 15 minutes.
Someone's been reading my LinkedIn, I think. That's great. That's true. I've got. There we go. That's cool. I still feel that way. Good job I updated my LinkedIn not that long ago, right? Yeah. Thank you, Roger. You've slightly scuppered my plans, as your content is not dissimilar to my content. But that's cool. There's plenty to talk about when it comes to assemblies and democracy. So no stress. No stress. I'm used to you talking. We're used to each other stealing our talking points anyway, aren't we? So,
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know,
yeah. Getting my own back.
I know, nothing new, nothing new. Roger always starts whenever he starts talking at assemblies, he's like, "Oh, Chris, it used to be that we did 50-50, but Chris is now slowly encroached onto my space and started doing all my talking points. So, I think it's only fair, like you say, get your own back. So, yeah, I'll speak a bit about Assemble. So I've been with Assemble for a year and a half now. Prior to that, I was with Humanity Project for a year. So I've been doing this assembly stuff for about 2.5 years now. Yeah, so basically, yeah, I'll speak a bit about a lot of it's going to be based on what I've been up to with Assemble, and exciting things coming up and useful case studies that you can learn a bit more about, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, so what is Assemble? So Assemble's been around for about a year and a half now. It's based on the idea that our current political system is broken. So, trust in politicians is at an all-time low, as we've seen from the last general election. We had the lowest turnout since equal suffrage. That is crazy. That is clearly evident of something going drastically wrong with our system and how people feel about it. So, we believe we need a new system that empowers everyday people, puts communities at the center of organising, as you've heard from Roger. So, in order to create this everyday, to create this system change, we need everyday people to be truly in the driving seat. So this means organising the assemblies that Roger was sort of alluding to, talking about, and, giving people a reason to come together, and then structuring pathways through which they can mobilise to create change. So, the idea is we've been setting up people's assemblies held locally, and these assemblies, their aim is for them to, they reorganize the power structures in play by bringing our fractured community back in touch with each other, shedding distrust and scapegoating for mutual understanding and communication. Obviously, we know the way the media works, loves to scapegoat specific demographics. We know the way politicians work, they blame others. And the idea is that when you sit people in front of each other in a facilitated manner, the outputs can really be quite radical because people are speaking to each other from their personal experience, from their life experience, how they feel about specific issues, and you've got two people with, potentially quite opposing views sitting in front of each other. And I've found from personal experience that this setup can really lead to some really quite compassionate outputs, because it's humans speaking to humans, not party politics and ideology clashing with the ideology. So And that means that communities can then make decisions in their best interests, right? And then mobilize collectively around these decisions. So, you know, and this can be done through collective action, mutual aid, pressure campaigns, community banking, much more. These assemblies, you know, the idea is for them to become centers of community that have a reputation as a place to create change and the forum to get things done. So obviously it's important to note, you know, when talking about things like mutual saving clubs, I just want to say, you know, I want to recognise Corporation Hull, who obviously can't be here today, but we're going to be. Gully is going to come and speak from Corporation Hull, but yeah, Corporation Hull obviously have done some really great work with that mutual sort of savings clubs, things like that, and that's really important. And it's, you know, we can all learn a lot from that. So I just want to recognise that. So as Roger's mentioned, we've been rolling out new strategy in Brixton. It's resulted in an 8 assembly set up, asking people what they think the key issues in their area is. So yeah, after the first 3, it became very clear that homelessness, addiction, and mental ill health were key issues, that, as Roger mentioned. So we ran assemblies delving deeper into these issues, asking people what they think the causes of these issues becoming more prominent are, and how they've been affected by them, and how they want to see them addressed, right? It's that participative element. We then, from that, held a campaign launch meeting with attendance from 150 plus people, 200 people surveyed in the run up to it, 2 MPs in attendance, multiple councils. So there's some of the stats, right? It was a successful event. And from there, as Roger mentioned, there's a variety of you know, ways and plans to take this campaign forward. But I'm not going to speak in detail about now, but I'm sure Roger and I will be happy to answer questions. But it's these assemblies as the centres of local decision making that can really mean that you get the mandate of the community to go forward and the buy-in, rather than that top-down approach from, you know, traditionally from political parties saying, this is what you want, we know what you want, get involved, right? Surely you'd want to get involved. You'd be stupid if you wouldn't be. Whereas we're trying to say, okay, what do you want? What do you need? Great. Okay, do you want to help make it happen? Wonderful. Let's take that forward. And I know that that's a, you know, that's a stark contrast, and, you know, a deliberately so, but it's effectively how these things work. So this new strategy builds off of many years of assembly organising, including a year and a half of setting up assemblies since Assemble debuted around the time of the last general election. So, bit of context is that the assembly strategy of the last year and a bit found Assemble supporting 30 plus groups all around the UK to set up assemblies in their local area. You know, we supported them with funding, with training, facilitation, training, all that stuff, resources, etc. Many of these groups are still on the go, such as Norwich, who've been running monthly assemblies for the last year now. Shout out to Norwich. Yeah, my personal favourite group. I'm the mate from my loud favourites. If not, redact that from the recording. Yeah. These, basically, they were a huge success, but we also realised we needed more to make these, you know, make the mobilisation turn exponential and get that sudden growth. You know, basically, so we developed our new strategy, which is building on the success of previous ones. And this strategy, in summary, you know, Roger said a bit of, you know, different aspects of it, but in summary, it starts with a 10-week campaign, running assemblies weekly to galvanise and build rapid momentum throughout the community. So we have paid organisers covering, you know, paid local organisers, local people who want to help, covering a total of 40 hours of work and helping coordinate a team of local volunteers. So the purpose is to build a self-funded local assembly campaign with high levels of local recognition that can then be taken forward by volunteers and eventually self-paid organisers. So it requires some certain aspect to it. So it, you know, this model, we've been you know, testing this out in Brixton and different places, and it requires, you know, fine-tuned micro design, specific aspects of a design that make it work so well. So it requires fine-tuned micro design around things like how to run the outreach, as Roger mentioned. It's like things like surveying, postering in a very specific manner, specific asks, a script that we fine-tuned, and then funding people into WhatsApp groups, which we found have been effective. Specific monthly donation asks with designs about how to exactly to ask for those donations to make them most effective. and then a clear direction for volunteers to get involved. And with this campaign, it's things like working groups on homelessness outreach, things like that, youth groups, religious community outreach, things like that. So yes, so that's kind of the design. That's the strategy design. It focuses on this fast-paced design with paid organisers to help carry that forward. So we've got 6 groups we're currently paying, with paid people, paid organisers locally. So that's Norwich, Brixton, Swindon, Plymouth, Totnes, and Walthamstow. Thank goodness I remembered those on the spot. I should have written them down. So yeah, we've got those 6 groups we're paying to supporting them, training them. Quite close-knit network, and then we've also got space for 15 more groups with partial funding, things like venues and things for the first couple of assemblies, and then obviously with more funding we'll continue to fund those. But as I said, the idea is that these groups can then, the fast-paced organising allows them to build that momentum, get that name recognition, and with monthly donations, create, after the funding of 10 weeks has been used, to then be self-funded in order to build, and have built those community contacts to get cheap or free venues, to pay for posters, to pay for resources they need. And that's key. It needs to be self-sustainable. So yeah, obviously you might be thinking, well, okay, great, local, wonderful, but how does this address the national side of things? So grassroots run assemblies, these assemblies can then link with each other as institutions of local empowerment. They recognize each other as being powerful and having that, being genuine institutions of local organising. They can coordinate with each other. Obviously, homelessness, housing, addiction, these are not issues only based in Brixton. These are issues that loads of communities across the country experience. And of course, local communities need to come to them of their own volition. They need to have created that mandate. They need to know why they're doing it. They need to explore these issues. And different localities will have different priorities. However, a lot of these issues will also be impacted nationally as well and be, shaped nationally. So, of course, these groups can then coordinate with each other, and the pressure they put on in different localities can be coordinated to create some real powerful impact. Similarly, on a national level, we've also been organising what's called the House of the People. So it's, surprise, surprise, a national people's house. Doesn't add much more to it there, does it? But it's a national people's house to rival the House of Lords. So it's people, everyday people in the UK, coming together to address key national issues, not politicians, not lobbyists, everyday people who genuinely, think for themselves and on the behalf of their communities. So this happened on the 20th and 22nd of July this year. We had 90 attendees from 70, we had a lottery of like 1,000 something people, but we had 90 attendees, with 70% of them selected by sortition, 30% of them chosen by and from local community groups around the country that have set up assemblies. So everyday people basically, with a mix of methods of using it to ensure that they're representative of the UK's, the population of the UK by demographic. So on day one of this, it was a 3-day thing. So on day one of this House of the People, we explored reports and case studies from local assemblies from around the country. Many of these local assembly teams, were supported by Assemble. Some of them were also totally independent, and they fed in, which was great because we want to build this wider movement, this ecology, not just Assemble's. I obviously can think Assemble's great, but if other groups also have the answers, they may be doing a better job than we might be, and that's really important. We need this ecology, so they all fed in to this. We're not the be and all and end all by any means, but yeah, so they all fed into this House of the People, and additionally, Corporation Hull, again, they've been coming up a few times, as you've noticed. Big thanks to them. Their case study and model was also incorporated and explored. So day one, the attendees in their groups of 6 to 7 people, each group facilitated, they explored these reports and demands and needs from local communities. Day 2, we heard from experts focusing on 4 key areas chosen at the House of the People premiere event the year prior. These four key issues were genocide and unjust wars, democracy, economics, and climate and environment. So we had experts, multiple experts from each of those areas, each with different areas of expertise, leading sort of, giving some information, and then each of the groups in their breakout groups could discuss the issues and come up with some outputs and start to think about, okay, what do they want as the output of this assembly? So on the final day, day 3, all of the attendees formatted and shaped the discussions and outputs of the previous days, these being from local groups, local priorities, charters, case studies, and from information from the experts on these key issues, into a people's charter. And this people's charter, it was a rigorous process over 3 days. It was really exciting and a privilege to see and be a part of. And if you want to find out about this people's charter, it's going to be published at the end of the month, end of November. So we've got a formal report covering all of the details about how we run the House of the People, all the information about statistics, what technology did we use to help it, what, slides and, different things like that, spending and funding and sortition methods and all of that. So this formal report and the People's Charter itself will be published at the end of November. So if you want to find out about that, you can follow House of the People UK. I'll put that in the chat. On any Instagram, so you can find out about basically the updates. There will be more sittings, and we're currently kind of shaping those, and I'm sure it won't be long before we announce what those sittings will be and how they'll work. So do follow that on social media, House of the People UK, in order to find out about those upcoming things, because we want the House of the People to become an institution of national decision making, not just a one-off flash in the pan. And then additionally, if you do want to, if you do want to sign up and find out more about this charter and see the report of that, you can find out here. You can sign up to that Zoom as well. That link's not working. There we go. So that's the setup. Basically, we've got local assemblies organised. Thank you, Annie, for putting that in the chat. Oh no, that link for the Zoom is working. So do check that out. We've got local assemblies organised around the country, a brand new exciting model that we're rolling out in different locations, an opportunity to get funded and supported. All of this designed and explored and experimented with right down to the micro design, and then a national strategy as well. And if you want to find out about what the outputs of the House of People were, if you're interested in what a bit of a summary and you can't wait, you're just on the edge of your seat, you can check out this press release and have a read. Some examples were that there was a total embargo on arms and trade and support for Israel, things like that. So it's all very exciting. And Assemble continues to evolve and develop. And it's great to see the progress of what we've learned in these assembly campaigns and how we're sharing that with the different ecology, how we're learning from Operation Whole, how we're learning from different groups in different countries. Over my last 2.5 years of running assemblies and mobilising assemblies. So that's a bit about what I've been doing. That's a bit of information about Assemble and the current strategy and the current information and some of our projects. I'd be very happy to answer any questions when it comes to that. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much there. We've actually got some great questions that have come in. They're not directed at any particular person, so I think we'll just do a fight to see who wants to answer them. And yes, I'm going to choose the questions which are objectively the best questions, or aka the ones that I find the most interesting. So, what do you do if you live in an area where people are generally doing well? I live in Denmark where people aren't complaining about housing or other down-to-earth issues. Does someone want to take this question?
That totally failed to register in my brain. I'm sorry.
I'll come to
Roger
the
can answer.
Well, there's 2 or 3 things to say about this, which is that often people think about groups in society as a sort of solid mass of, the Danish are prosperous and they don't want to do anything, if you see what I mean, which may well be the case in terms of a general statistical analysis. The average Danish person is fine, as we might say. But that's not really the analysis that we're engaged in. The analysis we're engaged in is to look at the group and to find the elements of that group for whom life is not fine. So, for the sake of argument, I'm sure there's many people in Copenhagen who aren't happy with a lot of things. So, there is a sort of strategic decision to be made here in prosperous Western societies, let's say, of going to those areas where there's a large number of marginalized people, working class people, or people that are being ignored, and then doing a listening exercise in those areas, and obviously building out from there, as you might say, once you've got some momentum. So that's the first thing. I suppose the second thing is, are you really sure that people are happy? I mean, has anyone actually asked them, that question? So often people think, oh, the people in Brixton, the people in London, everyone's doing fine. But when you actually get on the doorstep and you say, particularly if you ask the question twice, you might say, oh, is there any problems in Brixton? And people go, no, this seems all right. And you go, yeah, but if there was a problem, what would it be? And if you phrase it like that, if there was a problem, what would it be? Then suddenly people go, well, obviously the housing is a problem. But the reason they haven't said it is because they think it's a problem with no solution, so they don't talk about it. And this is one of the biggest problems of mobilizing people, is people have had so much experience of not being listened to or of things not happening that they've decided there aren't any problems because there's no point talking about them, if you see what I mean. So that's not to say, of course, that it is a problem if a population is broadly prosperous, but that's the general response, and it needs to be said, of course, as well, that maybe Denmark's a bit of an outlier in this, but in countries all around the Western world and indeed all around the world, there's a major crisis of governance. There's a major crisis of people not believing in the elites, not believing in democracy as it's presently constructed. And there was a big survey about this, like more than half of the population of 9 out of 10 Western democracies thinks democracy is in crisis, and all these other sort of stats. So I don't think you'll have a massive problem once you actually get out and start projects like this.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. So I have here from Flippy. Great, but how to identify the rupture moment or track how close we are if possible? So I think that's referring to if we are just building up this infrastructure which is ready for the big explosion to happen, the explosion of energy, how would we identify that moment, or how would we know we are getting close to it? Do you want to, who wants to go for this one?
Well, Roger, you're the expert on this. There's a lot of house people and assemble specific questions in the Q&A, so I can answer. But yeah, Roger, go for it if you fancy.
Whenever you do these things, there's always someone putting stuff in the chat to say you're the next thing to the devil, which is slightly distracting. So, but needless to say, I'm not the devil. Not I wouldn't claim such an honor.
Wow, Roger, you're a US asset now. Wow, crazy.
Anyway, so yes. Well, let me give you a concrete example of how this could work. Um, um, so a few years ago, there was a big crisis around. To be honest with you, I've forgotten what it was. I think it was something to do with the big debate about Europe in the UK and Brexit and what have you. And a teacher in North London put out a Facebook event saying, this is terrible, we all need to demonstrate. And she thought, like, 50 of her friends would go. And it turned out 50,000 people signed up to go on this demonstration. And then she had a massive panic because she thought she would be personally responsible for it. And then she cancelled it, or she attempted to cancel it. And this is a classic example of not being ready for the moment, because by the time I was asked to advise on it, obviously the horse had bolted and it was a big mess. So I think the concrete way in which people have discussed this is that it has to be a collective intelligence process on what is, just a minor thing, what's a medium-sized thing, and what is this is it type thing. And obviously, to a certain extent, it's pretty obvious. But the question is quite right. There has to be a concrete, semi-democratic decision to sort of mobilize around something. And the way to do this is to prepare an emergency group of people from different networks. So let's say someone thinks there's a crisis and there should be a national demonstration. Then they call this group of 5 to 15 people, at a few hours' notice. They put forward the proposition, and then people use their collective intelligence from their different backgrounds and campaigns and geographies to go, okay, this is it. Let's go and enact, Plan A. And the Plan A has already been organised, which is broadly all these groups go around their networks and publicise a demonstration, which may lead to some civil disobedience or a series of them, and then organise a sort of startup campaign around it, with a website and a bunch of Zoom meetings and all the rest of it. So a lot of people, no doubt who are watching this call already know how to do this sort of thing. But you're quite right. The main thing is making that decision, and arguably this is the most efficient. It combines efficiency and democracy at the same time, as you might say. So that's the direction of travel.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for that. So I think I've got one here that's probably closer for you, Chris, which is from Fiona. I work with spokespeople. It's not very easy to explain the House of the People/Citizens Assemblies concisely when under pressure from a hostile interviewer. Any hot tips? What explanation in your experience cuts through the quickest or appeals to the most people?
That's a fun question. I really like that. That's great. And a very practical one, and a hard question to answer. You're totally right. Like, I think the House of People is part of a bigger picture, and people think, oh well, why, it's not going to work. Well, how do you get into Parliament? No, no. I mean, I think the thing I always like to say to get across the purpose of the House of People and generally assemble and people's assemblies is asking them the question, do you think you can trust everyday people more than politicians? And a lot of people will go, yeah, definitely. Because I mean, if you look at the stats, no one trusts this politician, no one trusts politicians. Like that's just kind of a generally quite accepted thing. I think, or you can say something along the lines of, yeah, you can trust everyday people more than politicians, right? And that's what we're about. We're trying to get everyday people in the center of decision making, and we want to show that that's possible. And obviously, people want to find out more about it. They can do, but I think the important thing is to open people's minds to the concept that actually we don't have to listen to politicians aren't the only way of coming together and organizing and creating change and power. The way we've made decisions for the last 100,000 years is coming together as a community. It's only recently we've had this weird little system. So yeah, I just like asking people that question, and then it opens their minds and goes, yeah, definitely. And then you can be like, well, why, let's create a system where we don't need to. Politicians don't need to be, at the center of it, being lobbied by X, Y, Z parties. So yeah, I don't think there's any sort of perfect response to it, and it is a I guess a slightly more it's a new concept to a lot of people, right? People are like, it's totally new to a lot of people, but I think a good way to start is to open people's minds to the concept that it's normal to trust everyday people more than you trust politicians. So why are we putting politicians at the center of our decisions? Yeah, I think that's how I'd answer that.
Yeah, fantastic answer. Okay, so there's quite a few actually that we're running out of time, Sally, but there's quite a few amazing questions left. I think just as perhaps a quick one for you again, Chris, is interested to hear Chris's aside about WhatsApp groups not working. Can you say more about this, please, Chris?
Let's
And
have a
I'm
look.
very interested to hear about yours.
WhatsApp groups not working or WhatsApp groups working?
Not working.
Okay. Um. Oh no. So we found WhatsApp groups were working. So that's what we found. Maybe you misheard that. We found that WhatsApp groups were working all right. I think we're still exploring this more. It's not, it's not something that we've solved, and WhatsApp groups are the best solution to everything. It's totally not that. However, we found it's a great port of call to get people on board. In fact, Roger and I had a chat about this yesterday with the team. But it's a great way to get people initially on board because it's a really low barrier of entry. You can show them a QR code and you can go, "Hi, have you got a phone on you?" And they go, yeah. Oh, great. Just scan this. It'll give you all the info you need, and you'll be able to, find out about the next assembly. And they'll go, "Oh, great, wonderful." And they scan it and they're in. And then you've got their number, and they've obviously chosen to do that. They're in the chat, and then you can mobilize them from there. I mean, by all means, it's not perfect because the nature of WhatsApp chats mean that there's a lot of people in one channel, and there's not always super stellar interactions. And that's something that's within the next week we're hoping to solve with some different experiments and trying things out with merging, WhatsApps with CRMs or like customer relationship management, like databases, emails, and different pathways and things like that. So we're trying to merge those two things and get the best of both worlds at the moment. And there's Oren behind me, who's also been helping to do organising Brixton. There he is. Yeah. So basically, that's kind of the setup with the WhatsApps. Like they're great, but they're not the only solution. And we're still trying to kind of navigate that and work out the best way to use them. But we've certainly found something there.
Okay, fantastic. And let's say one last question here, which I think it speaks to, I think a lot of the thing with assemblies, which is this an anti-capitalist movement or is it not specific? I.e., do you go into the assembly with a particular outcome in mind, or does the assembly decide on its own? I think that's
Maybe
what they're asking.
Yeah, Roger, do you want to go first, and maybe I can say something with regards to assemble as well.
Right. So this is a central, it is arguably the central strategic challenge of the revolutionary strategy, which is if you have to engage the conundrum goes as follows. In order to create a revolutionary movement, a mass movement for system change, you have to involve lots of people. That's point one. And then point two is if you involve lots of people, then you revert to a reformist, potentially reactionary thing because lots of people are getting involved with false consciousness, as it used to be called, right? So this is a 200-year debate about what can and should do. And so it shouldn't surprise you that basically it's about not throwing the baby out with the bathwater. It's about a smart combination of the two logics that you need loads of people involved, and obviously they need to be educated, as some people call it. And the big creative solution to it is the observation that people radicalize through participation rather than information. Again, not all the time, and it's not like information isn't important or education isn't important in that sense. So what that precisely means is as people come into the assembly and they talk with other people, they realize that what wasn't possible is now possible. And this is the process of radicalization. In other words, most people are a lot more radical than you think, but they don't think they can get what they want. And so they become more like liberal or even more right wing because they've lost faith in the system. Now, again, you need to have like a sophisticated analysis of who does what, where, when, and how. Obviously, a lot of people that come into the assemblies will be progressive already because they like assemblies and all the rest of it, in which case they're going to get more organized and create collective action around the popular radical issues. Then there's another group of people who are apathetic or repressed or so agitated about nothing happening that they've generally adopted a sort of anti-radical stance. But through the process of the assembly, they come round, as it were, to a more class-based analysis rather than knocking immigrants analysis, for instance. And they go, yeah, well, obviously the problem is we need to tax the rich. Well, that's not possible, and therefore we need to do, go on to the immigrants. This is the general sort of narrative background. And so a lot of those people, through the process of the assembly, will go, right, great, we're going to do, a progressive campaign. And then, inevitably, there's a long tail of people who are either, you know, traumatized or ideological or just bad, in inverted commas, who are never going to change. And in the extreme situation, you have to ask them to leave the assembly, particularly if they're disruptive because they're being abusive or aggressive and such like. But 9 times out of 10, that doesn't happen. And this is not just some hunch. Like this is on the basis of a a large amount of empirical observation of how assemblies can work. Obviously, if they're run well, and what assembles spends a lot of time on is training people to run well-run assemblies. So that's the general sort of least bad scenario, as you might say. Chris, did you want to add to that?
I think we're going to have to close there because the meeting finishes in less than 1 minute.
No,
I
does it?
cut
Oh
into the
no.
time. I'm supposed to do a closing remarks, but I cut into it to give more question answering time. I hope everyone has really enjoyed that. I found it very insightful and it got lots of different ideas coming through. I'm now going to share my screen to show a picture, and this picture symbolizes that the event has finished. Um, Please wait for this.
It's time to assemble. That's the link
Yes,
for
it's
everyone.
time to assemble. Share my screen. Yes, everyone should be able to see this now, which says that this meeting has ended. If you want to consider supporting, please go to www.rev21.earth/support. That's www.rev21.earth/support. And I will hopefully see you in some of the sessions later on today. Let's get a final goodbye from the panel. If you want to just say a quick goodbye, both of you.
Thanks,
Yeah.
everyone.
Hi.
Thanks so much for
Thanks for
listening.
coming.
Brilliant.
Thanks.
Thank you again. Okay. Goodbye. Everyone can start filtering out now.